Will Zac Robinson's second year as a play caller mirror that of Kyle Shanahan?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this podcast, been podcasting for almost a decade and a half. And I appreciate each and every one of you that goes strong with me, whether it's you've been doing it for 15 years or for 15 seconds. I appreciate you. And I hope you continue to be an everydayer of this podcast, which means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today we're talking about Kyle. We'll give an update on Kyle Pitts' injury confirmed by the coaching staff. We'll talk about joint practices and preseason snap counts, whether I'm more eager to see the offense or defense this year, why I hate rookies. But we'll start today's episode revisiting yesterday's conversation about Zac Robinson and sort of skimming through some of the comments. I saw a couple people talking about this on yesterday's episode and talking about the potential for a year 2 jump. And I think that we will see a year 2 jump for Zac Robinson. The question is going to be how much of a year 2 jump. But I kind of want to clarify to make it clear for folks. My issue is not that I think Zac Robinson is a poor play caller. Like, I don't think his offense overall is bad, right? And if you missed yesterday's episode, we used a humorous analogy, if I could say so, talking about, Zac Robinson's play action passing game, referring specifically to the play action aspect of his offense being overcooked, unseasoned chicken. And it's like, to me, if we're continuing that analogy, it's like he has a chicken restaurant and the chicken is not very good, right? But the sides are fine, right? And so it's not like you go there and you get a bad meal. It's not a great meal. You went there for the chicken. That's been the selling point. That's the thing they advertise it. And it was very disappointing. And the reason why I say it like that is because, like, that's what these coaches that Zac Robinson is included in, these Shanahan McVay disciples, that's what they're known for. They're known for their chicken. They're known for their ability to marry their run games with the play action passing game. When you go and you look at, not only the top 10 to 15 offenses in the league over the last couple of years, where these guys have really permeated the league over the last, 5 to 8 years, often you see these Shanahan McVay disciples, but specifically when it comes to that play action passing game, when in the top 10 to 15 teams, it feels like almost every year, like 75% of those top 10 to 15 teams are, Shanahan McVay disciples, right? And we're going to do a deeper dive into the numbers a little bit later this summer, but the reason why the play action passing game to me is so important is because it's so beneficial to your young quarterback. And I think it's just beneficial to your offense overall, but specifically for a young quarterback like Michael Penix, right? That if you go back over the last 5 or so years and you look at all the successful first and second year quarterbacks, it all seems like my preliminary research, and again, we'll do further research as the summer wears on, but my preliminary research is like they all seem to hit a certain level when it comes to, like, they have a certain level of yards off of play action. Like, it's like 1,200 yards. So it's like averaging like 70 yards a game off of play action. And then when you apply that to, say, Michael Penix, and you look at how many yards off of play action he had in those last 3 games, he was averaging like 40 yards a game, right? And it's like, he needs to be almost twice as good to reach that bar of success that a lot of these young quarterbacks have. And it's like, it's okay to be a straight drop back passing attack, but when you look at the teams that typically are only getting 40 or less yards per game off of play action in terms of their passing yards, the only teams that they typically tend to be bad offenses or teams that are helmed by, like, guys that have 10 plus years of experience. And it's like, when you have that many reps, like, yeah, sure, you don't need the play action because you can read a defense. But, and I'm sure some of you are like, well, that's what the Falcons had with Kirk Cousins. That's why, it's like, well, that's the thing. Even though Kirk Cousins has the experience to operate a drop back passing game, he's never really done that because almost all his offenses, going back to his days at Washington or Minnesota, were heavy play action based passing attacks, right? He's consistently been like in the top 10 or 12 when it comes to utilizing play action over the decade that he's been in the NFL. And so we're not going to necessarily rehash it, but let's talk about how things can get better in year 2 for Zac Robinson. Now that Zac Robinson, has learned some recipes, he's gone to YouTube, he's learning about seasonings and spices. And now with this chicken that we're going to see in year 2. And again, I'm hoping that we see a big year 2 jump for Zac Robinson, similar to what we saw with Kyle Shanahan. And I don't like making comparisons to Kyle Shanahan, because the minute we do, people start thinking about, oh, we're going to be a historically great offense and we're going to go to the Super Bowl. And that's not what I mean. But you did see a big year 2 jump for Kyle Shanahan, along with several other. But for me, when I'm making this comparison, I'm talking specifically about having certain expectations in the first year going for that play caller, and then being disappointed because they didn't live up to those expectations, then lowering those expectations in year 2, and then having those expectations blown away. And I'm hoping that happened with Kyle Shanahan. And I'm hoping we get something similar with Zac Robinson this year. But let's go back to 2015 with Kyle Shanahan to really give you what I'm talking about. And I remember writing about this for FalcFans.com, RIP, back during the summer of 2015. I want to say it was like June, July of that summer. But you looked at the roster of that team, and it wasn't that stacked. They had, Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman, sort of unproven running backs at that point. Their receiver core was, of course, Julio Jones, but Roddy White was on the decline. They brought in Leonard Hankerson and Nick Williams and Justin Hardy, and they still had Devin Hester. They bring in a bunch of new tight ends, Jacob Tamme and Tony Milwaukee, according to Alan Sturck, alongside Levine Toilolo. And you had, of course, the incomparable Patrick DeMarco at fullback. But even then, in that 2015 season, like, DeMarco hadn't reached the heights that we all knew Patrick DeMarco. He reached them in 2015, but going into that season, we didn't know that because he was in a competition with Colin Mooney, and he was not a surefire winner. But I remember writing about it at FalcFans.com, which was basically like, I don't think this skill group is particularly good or talented, but I think Shanahan's going to be able to effectively scheme it up. Right? It's like Julio's going to be your foundation, and the quote unquote genius of Kyle Shanahan is that he's going to have just kind of a group of individuals rotate from week to week, exploiting the matchup that is favorable for that team in any given game with that skill group players, because there's nobody else in that group that you look to and say, that's a guy that's going to consistently show up week in and week out and be a performer. And it's just like, we're just going to have that be a rotating collection of guys. And if we're going to use another analogy, it's like Batman and Robin. Like, Julio's the Batman, but you don't have a Robin. Right. And so instead of having a Robin, Batman is just recruiting like low-level sidekick vigilantes with very little training and saying, okay, I need your help to take down crime in the city. And unfortunately, like, those guys didn't have the chops to do the job that they were asking to do. Right. And so you saw that in 2015. Now, to be fair, in 2015, especially in the first half of that season, kind of Devontae Freeman kind of emerged as that Robin player that the Falcons were looking for. But you had a good 1-2 punch with those guys early in the season. But then Julio got hurt after like 3 games. And so Batman was missing. And then, Robin was kind of able to carry the thing. The run game was kind of able to carry it for another couple of games. But then after that week 8 game, going into that 49ers game where the run game just completely bottomed out against the 49ers, things kind of evaporated. And then the Falcons at that point were like 6-2. They lost 5 straight games. And that's where a lot of the fire Shanahan stuff was coming from, where it was at its loudest during that stretch of 5 games when the offense was struggling. And I was never a fire Shanahan guy, but certainly didn't deliver. And I certainly wasn't going to die on any hill defending Kyle Shanahan going into that 2016 offseason. It was basically like the mob was out there, going to get Kyle Shanahan. I was like, maybe we should let him go. And then someone was like, who said that? And I was like, oh, I don't know. It wasn't me, like that was kind of how I felt about the whole Shanahan sort of situation. And that's partially why, I was a little bit of a Sanu hater when the Falcons brought in all those extra pieces, rather than relying on low-level street toughs, right? Batman was, actually went out and recruited some proven sidekicks, and Sanu was one of those guys. And I was negative on the Sanu signing because I'm like, we need another explosive playmaker. We don't need another possession guy like Roddy and Hankerson and Justin Hardy were, right? And I still don't think I was wrong about that in my assessment of Sanu, but I was wrong in the assessment of how Sanu was going to help Julio Jones. It was essentially Julio had to be the everything in your offense, the explosive guy, the chain mover, and then Sanu kind of took the chain mover stuff off his plate. It's basically the equivalent of the Batman analogy, which is now Julio being Batman in the situation can just kind of focus on on the high level supervillains in Gotham City, the Joker, the Riddler, etc. And Sanu can kind of fight the low level crime. He can respond to someone holding up a corner store or the bodega or whatever, and that just takes that off. That's one less thing that Batman has to deal with, so that he can focus on the real task at hand. Taking down the top supervillains in Gotham City, if you're following my analogy. And so, essentially for Kyle Shanahan in that way, year 2 delivered on year 1's promise, right? Where, you had a bunch of sort of supplementary pieces, whether it's Mohamed Sanu, Zac Robinson, Taylor Gabriel, Tevin Coleman made a big jump in year 2. And those guys sort of supplemented the Batman and Robin combination that you had in Julio Jones and Devontae Freeman in that 2016 season. And obviously it led to the success that the Falcons had. And so my hope is that year 1's promise with Zac Robinson is, he's a McVay disciple. He's going to be able to marry that run game with the play action and deliver a high potent play action passing attack. And we're going to spend more time this summer talking about all the ways that can deliver this year and how they can diversify things and whatnot. And we'll see if they can deliver on that year 2 in terms of that improvement. And so, I'll leave it with this, where I tend to be a little bit more skeptical of that year, how big that year 2 jump. There will be a jump, but I just wonder how big it is going to be, because at least with Shanahan, you kind of got that appetizer, right? You got those first 5 or 6 games of the season when the Falcons were like a top 3 offense and top half of the league in explosiveness, to sort of show you, okay, this is what we have the potential to be. And now year 2, instead of getting only 5 games of that, we're getting 15 games of that. And I don't know if you got, at least when it applies to the play action, did you get that with Zac Robinson? The only game I would point to and say that was a taste of what you could be from a play action standpoint is that Giants game late in the season. And we talked about it on the pod, on the All 22 review after that, where you saw, split zone play action concept. You saw Yankee concepts, other routes attacking the middle of the field. And I basically said, this is the offense I was envisioning the Falcons having from day one. And they took 16 games to get there. And then it was kind of the only time we got there, because we didn't get a continuation of that really in Washington and Carolina game to the degree that I hope to be. So we'll see on that front. So that's why I tend to be a little bit more skeptical, a little bit more quick to criticize Zac Robinson, because I don't feel like I got the appetizer. I just got a little taste of what is to come to continue that analogy. So we'll see. So I'm eager to see if we get more of that in this upcoming season, but we'll talk more about, that offense versus the defense, which side of the ball I'm more eager to see, answering one of our listener questions as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So as a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5 and your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in, and they're going to make it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. When you post your job, LinkedIn has a new feature that's going to help you write job descriptions and then quickly get that job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So this question comes from one of our Locked On Falcons insiders, Aiden. Link in the description below. By the way, I'll let the people know that, we're going to have a little bit of a pause between doing the full breakdowns of the draft picks, Billy Bowman and Jack Nelson, here on the podcast. I got to catch up on some film. Just been kind of a slog getting through it. So we might not see those breakdowns until next week on the pod. We'll see on that. But if you're a Locked On Falcons insiders, I've already delivered film breakdowns on all 5 of the Falcons draft picks. And we did an hour plus on Jack Nelson. Who could have possibly done? Only a sicko, absolute sicko, could do an hour plus. And that was actually the longest video breakdown we did on the 7th round offensive lineman. But that's the type of sicko behavior that you can get in on by becoming a Locked On Falcons insider, as well as getting that priority when it comes to questions being answered on the pod or privately. And all you got to do is join that link in the description below. It's a 14-day free trial, and then $4.99 a month after that point. But Aiden's question is, which part of the team are you most excited for? Not the infamous O word, optimistic, but fully eager to see. Michael Penix, Drake, and Mooney, Bijan, Kyle Pitts, or defensive rookies, or maybe something else. So I am eager to see the offense, despite all my concerns about the offense, because I do think there is legit potential, despite all those concerns, that if things go right, that this could be a top 5 to 8 unit this year. And when you have a young quarterback like Michael Penix, in conjunction with the run game, those weapons that you mentioned, the offensive line, and good play calling that we're hoping to get to see, there is legit potential for this team to be a high potent offense. And then you couple that with the fact that like team success is driven by offensive output for the most part, more so than defensive success. That gets me really excited, potentially excited. Like there's more room for excitement for me. It was like, oh, like I get to do a podcast about a team that may actually have a really good offense, and we can talk about that throughout the season and all the reasons why it's good and all this stuff and all the different things that Zac Robinson is cooking up, and that gets me, somewhat excited for that stuff. And so we'll see if they click. And if this team and so like part of that is due to like if that happens, this team is going to be able to click and hopefully finish the season strong, right? Because you go back to the last 2 seasons and you go back to my sort of predictions on the season. Like both years, I think I predicted the Falcons to go 10-7, right? And obviously they didn't live up to those expectations, but it was basically those 10-7 predictions was because I was predicting them to finish strong. Because in 2024, I had their record at 6-7 and predicted them to win their last 4, or something like that. And I didn't have them. Yeah, the last 4. I can't do math. I was like 6 + 4 = 11. And it's like, that's not what that number is. I can't do math while I'm talking, guys. It's just 2 parts of my brain. So I had them at 6-7, and then I predicted them to win their last 4 games. And they did get to 6-7, and then they split their last 4 games to get to 8-9 last year instead of the 10-7 I predicted them to be. And then in 2023, I predicted them to go 6-6 and then win 4 out of their last 5. They got to 6-6, and then they lost 4 of their last 5 to finish 7-10 that year. And so that's kind of where for me it always struggles, where it's like the team is kind of what you think they are, and then it's like you're hoping they get over that hump at the end of the season when things are firing on all cylinders. And I talked about this on the Atlanta Football Party on Monday. It's like when you look at one of the big reasons why the Bucs have won the division the last 2 years is because of how strong they finish and how well Baker Mayfield has played in the month of December. Like he's basically, you look at certain, efficiency metrics, like adjusted net yards per attempt, like he's basically been the second or third best quarterback in the month of December over the last 2 years combined, behind Lamar Jackson. And I think maybe Brock Purdy might be a notch ahead of him. But you look at, the Bucs record at similar points of the season, like in 2023, when the Falcons were 6-6, the Bucs were 5-7, and then the Bucs won 4 out of the last 5. And in 2024, Falcons were 6-7. The Bucs were 6-6. They won 4 out of the last 5 in that season. So they've gone 10-2 in the month of December or after Thanksgiving in each of the last 2 years combined. And so that's really what you need. It's not too dissimilar when we're talking about that 2016 team with Kyle Shanahan, where that team really finished strong, winning their last 4 games. And so that's the thing that gets me excited. Like, am I going to be sitting here talking going into Thanksgiving weekend against the Jets and whatnot, talking about, oh, this offense is going to get tested against this Jets defense? And are we going to be able to see, this offense finish strong and make this push for the playoffs late in the season? So that's the thing that I'm eager to see. I'm not as eager to see the rookies or the defense. I just refuse to ever get excited about a Falcons defense or Falcons rookies, right? Particularly on that side of the ball. Right. And if you ever do see me get excited about a Falcons defense or the rookie class, then it's probably me calling for help, and you need to send a SEAL team to come get me because I'm, locked up or something like that. And so, like I feel like with the defense, like if they finish 20th in the league this year on defense, like this coaching staff deserves a standing ovation. Right. One of those Cannes Film Festival standing ovations that last for like 48 minutes or something like that. Like that's what they did. Like that's how good they have to coach in order to get this defense to that level, in my humble opinion. And I know there's going to be people that disagree with me, but when I was saying similar things last year, people were like, no, this defense is going to be a top 10, 15. And I was like, you sure about that? But, and like when it comes to rookies, like, like, we won't go into it deeply, but we'll just go back to like Bijan Robinson, right? And like Bijan is the most talented rookie the Falcons have drafted since Julio Jones. And there was every reason to be excited about Bijan. And especially for me, as you may or may not recall, that like back in December, I was talking about the Falcons drafting Bijan And a lot of people are like, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, all right, we'll see. But like the main reason for that was because I understood that Arthur Smith wants to run the ball 600 times, and you can't put that type of workload on another running back, on just one running back and Tyler Algier. And so you need a second running back. And if you need a second running back, why settle for a third or fourth round pick when you can get Bijan Robinson? That was basically the conclusion that I reached, months in advance of that. But, it took everybody else a while to catch up. But the point of me saying all that is not to toot my own horn, is to basically say, I had every reason in the world to be hyping up Bijan Robinson is basically what I'm saying. And I wasn't doing that. Like I did multiple episodes in the summer of 2023 talking about people need to pump the brakes on the Bijan hype because, you looked at all the fantasy experts that had his average draft position, taking the top 3 in their fantasy drafts and expecting this sort of Derrick Henry type of like 300 plus carry, 1,500 plus yards, 12 plus touchdown season. And I was like, that's not going to be the case, guys. Like this is a two-headed backfield, and Bijan and Tyler Algier are going to split carries, and so he's not going to live up to that hype. He's going to be closer to RB10 than he is RB3. So you guys are, reaching on these draft picks, but no one didn't listen to me. And so I say that because like that's just further proof. Like I will never hype up a rookie, and you go back to 2015. I remember when Vic Beasley got drafted and people were like, this is going to be the next superstar. And it's like, how many sacks is he going to have as a rookie? Is it going to be 10? Is it going to be 12? Is it going to be 15? And I was like, maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit, guys. Like, and people were like, no, man, full steam ahead. And like, we haven't quite seen that yet with, I think, James Pierce and Jalen Walker. Like I've seen some hype for those guys like that, but it hasn't been overwhelming like it normally is. And, it feels like the conversation is instead like, how many sacks are these guys going to have combined? Is it going to be 10, 12, 15, 20 sacks as rookies combined, as opposed to each individual guy getting those sacks? Although if they combine for 20, obviously that's 10 plus. And I'm like, I would tell people, again, I'm sure I'll get some feedback on this. But like I would say, go into the season between the two of them, Jalen Walker and James Pierce, I would expect 5 sacks and hope for 10. That's basically what I would say to folks in terms of what those expectations for those rookies are. And so that's kind of how I always feel about rookies. I just feel like we tend to overrate how good these guys are. And once in a blue and a moon, you get a high level rookie, but even Julio Jones, who's like arguably the greatest player to ever put on a Falcons uniform, didn't he had 1,000-yard season, but it was just basically because he went off in like 5 games and then kind of was like a no-show in like 5 games and then was just okay in like the other 5 games. Like that's kind of how Julio's rookie season kind of went. But like people don't really remember that because like they just look at the numbers at the end of the season, like, oh, he was amazing right away in the NFL. And it's like, not really. Like, it kind of took a while to kind of get going in the season. And no offense to James Pierce or Jalen Walker, but like, if Julio couldn't do it, then why would I expect anybody else to do it? So that's kind of why I tend to temper my expectations for rookies. And so we'll see on that front. We'll see if James Pierce and Jalen Walker get a lot more run in the preseason, but we'll wrap up today's episode giving an update on Kyle Pitts' foot injury and sort of, we got joint practices coming our way. And what does that mean for the potential of seeing how much of James Pierce and Jalen Walker this preseason? We'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So we heard last week, after the Kyle Pitts trade buzz sort of broke, that Kyle Pitts was absent from OTAs last week for the Falcons, according to James Pierce, a Bleacher Report, dealing with a foot injury. And we seemingly got confirmation from Raheem Morris that it was an injury that was keeping Kyle Pitts out of OTAs and that the team was going to be extra cautious with them. Raheem did not confirm that it was specifically a foot injury because it's June and he is not, legally obligated or, league, if you get what I'm saying, the league mandates that you have to give out, injury information during the season, but you don't have to do that during the off season like that. So he didn't confirm whether it was a foot injury, but he did confirm it was an injury related issue. So, don't go too crazy with your, trade rumors and trade proposals because Kyle Pitts is missing OTAs. There is nothing there's always something nefarious going on with the Atlanta Falcons, but I don't think this is that something. But we also got the update on Friday, in addition to all the Kyle Pitts trade stuff, of the official preseason schedule that we did not talk about yet, because we got to talk about Kyle Pitts and Zac Robinson preseason. But no, we got the official preseason schedule confirmed with the Falcons, will be opening up against the Detroit Lions on August 8th at home. Then they'll follow that the following Friday on August 15th against the Titans. And then the following Friday on the road against the Dallas Cowboys on August 22nd. And we also learned today that the Falcons will be holding joint practices with the Titans in the lead up to that second preseason game on August 15th. So it basically kills any chance that we're going to see starters that week. We did get to see, last year they had the joint practice against the Dolphins in the first preseason game, and we did see some select players play in that first preseason game. And that is going to get to where I want to wrap up today's episode. And this is more of an August conversation than a June conversation, but I do want to kind of touch upon it now that we're talking about it. It's just like, I am very curious to see how much Raheem is willing to play some of these young guys, including the James Pierces and the Jalen Walkers, right? That we saw last year that he sat virtually all of his starters. Like the only starters that you could say technically played in the preseason was at the safety position. And that was, depending on who you think was the starter, Richie Grant or DeMarco Hellams. And then DeMarco Hellams got hurt, in the first series of that Dolphins game. And so the one starter he played, if you want to say DeMarco Hellams was poised to be the starter, and it seems like circumstances later on with the signing of Justin Simmons and the fact that Richie Grant got no playing time last year kind of told you that the Falcons were planning on Hellams being the starter. The one starter that they did play did get hurt. And so I wonder what Raheem's reaction is. Is it going to make him more tentative to play even some of those guys? Now, I don't think we're going to see starters regardless. I think we're going to not see select backups either. Right. We only saw when we did get to see select backups last summer, right? Like Charlie Warner didn't play, Tyler Algier didn't play in the preseason, right? But the guys that we did, like Eddie Goldman and Clark Phillips, Ross Dwelly, guys that we kind of knew were going to be on the roster, but they kind of got quick hooks, after a series or two in that first preseason game and then never played in the preseason again. And I wonder if they're going to do the same this summer, right? And some of the players I'm thinking of that could be on that list that aren't starters are guys like Kadero Hodge or Storm Norton, Ruka Roro, Zach Harrison, Brandon Dorless, JD Bertrand, Troy Anderson. Are these guys going to get action this preseason? Because based off of how Raheem handled similar guys last preseason, it would indicate that they might play a series or two tops this summer. And I wonder about the rookies, right? Because we did get to see the rookies play last summer, but after that first game, it felt like there were diminishing snaps for each one of those guys that, by the third game, some of them weren't playing even at all. And it makes me wonder, like when it comes to Jalen Walker and James Pierce, because the Falcons are quote unquote so intentional about playing these rookies this year that they don't want to expose them to injury. And so it's like, are we going to get, one or two series from Jalen Walker and James Pierce in that Lions game, and then they're done? And obviously I understand why Raheem makes those choices because of the injury stuff. And I'm sure we'll have a very big debate, but as you guys know, I'm just I want to see the guys play. That's basically how I'm here to be entertained, right? Are you not entertained? And I'm not entertained by not seeing any of the high profile backups, like the rookies, not being on the field in the preseason. And I know it opens up the injury risk. I know it was, terrible what happened with DeMarco Hellams and Braylon Trice, but outside of, again, not dismissing it, but it is one of those things where it's we focus on those two specific injuries, but it's basically two injuries out of, a possible 50, actually occurred. And it's just kind of fluky and random who gets hurt in those games. Like DeMarco Hellams, a team, I can't remember which teammate it was, but someone basically fell into his leg pursuing a run play or something like that, or a kickoff or whatever it was. And that's a fluky injury, Braylon Tress took a wrong step and his knee buckled and he tore his ACL, those are just kind of fluky things. And so you can't really control for that other than just basically we refuse to play these guys. And, I'm not one of those people that thought last year that the Falcons struggled against the Steelers because they didn't play guys in the preseason. I thought they'd struggle against the Steelers because they had a terrible game plan. We don't talk about Bruno. But it is one of those things where it's you want to get these rookies ready to play. And so I want to see those guys. So we'll see what Raheem winds up doing. I'm sure we will be debating and complaining about it all summer long, all August, throughout that process. I'm trying to make peace with it, but I'm just I want to see him, like, I don't know. But, let me know what you guys think about that. What you think about, what type of year two jump, what are some of the things that you're hoping to see from Zac Robinson? What side of the ball are you eager to see? Are you the opposite of me? You're hyped to see these rookies. You're hyped to see what this defense can be, as opposed to the offense. It's like, yeah, the offense, we know the offense is going to be good. Like, it's just how good the offense is going to be. But I'm really excited about what this defense can be, this defense coming together. And I'm just like, man, that's so reminiscent of yesteryears. I'm like, I've heard that so many times over the last decade. I'm just like, anytime someone's like, this defense is starting to come together, I'm just like, all right, you sure. It never does, but I appreciate the effort that you put into it. So we will see on that front. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen as we continue to talk about all those various things all summer long. We'll see. I think I'm just sitting here thinking about what we're going to get into tomorrow. And I do kind of want to talk about, we talked a little bit about Kyle Pitts' route tree. I kind of want to do the research and look at Darnell Mooney and Drake London's route tree, along with Rayron McLeod's, at these wide receivers, to kind of really see, some room for growth for some of these guys, in addition to Kyle Pitts this year, as part of that year two jump that this offense is going to make. So that is what I'm hoping to get into on tomorrow's episode. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen in order to catch that episode by checking us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the draft dudes, Joe Marino, Kyle Krabs. They are going to get you geared up all summer long for this upcoming season and training camp with all the great storylines. Check them out on the same podcast platforms you can find Locked On Falcons. It is all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.